Nora Hall had always believed that the real test of love came not in candlelit proposals, but in how a couple faced their families. The Whitbys of Ripon were old-money Yorkshire gentry, stone farmhouse, ancestral silver, and a habit of calling things tradition whenever Ruth Whitby wanted her way. When Nora got engaged to Daniel, Ruth's only son, she'd practice patience, smiling through questions about her modern upbringing and nodding at lectures on how Whitby women behave. The rehearsal dinner, hosted in the Whitby barn-turned-banqueting hall, glowed with fairy lights. Nora's friends from Leeds sat together near the back, laughing too loudly for Ruth's taste. Ruth, crisp in slate silk, floated between tables like a queen surveying her domain. Every bouquet, every napkin fold bore her signature. Daniel whispered to Nora, "She just needs to feel useful," but even he seemed to shrink under his mother's approving gaze. When the caterer handed Nora a printed program, she felt her stomach tighten. The schedule read, "Welcome speech, Mrs. Ruth Whitby." Then family blessing, Reverend Mark James. Then closing toast, Daniel Whitby. Nowhere did it mention Nora Hall, the bride. She blinked, thinking it a mistake. She'd spent nights drafting her brief toast, warm, simple, thanking guests and staff. She'd even rehearsed the line about her late father, who'd taught her to believe good manners were just empathy spoken aloud. She showed the program to Daniel. "Did you see this?" He frowned. "Mum probably used an old version. I'll talk to her." But when Ruth returned carrying a silver tray of miniature puddings, Daniel hesitated. "Mum, Nora's toast isn't on here." "Oh, that," Ruth said lightly. "We streamlined the schedule. People get restless. Daniel's speech will speak for both of you." Nora set down her glass. "You changed the program without asking?" Ruth smiled thinly. "It's still your day, darling. I'm simply keeping it elegant." Elegant. That word again, weaponized like lace over barbed wire. Nora's cheeks burned, but she only said, "Understood." Later that night, Nora sat on the window seat of their borrowed cottage, looking out over the dark hedgerows. Daniel had gone to bed after murmuring, "Please don't start something now." She touched the corner of her speech note cards, still in her purse. The handwriting looked fragile in the lamplight, her father's fountain pen, blue ink smudged by her thumb. A knock came. It was Lila, her maid of honor and childhood friend. "You all right?" Nora managed a nod. Lila plopped beside her, scanning the program. "No toast? That's deliberate. She's controlling the whole event." "Then you make your own space. You still have the mic after Daniel, don't you?" Nora smiled faintly. "If she doesn't unplug it first." They laughed, but something steeled inside Nora. She folded the cards and slipped them into a book, marking the page with a brass key. An old key from her grandmother's sewing chest that she'd turned into a pendant. Glinted like resolve. The next morning, chaos arrived in cream envelopes. Ruth circulated updated seating charts printed overnight. Nora's university friends, originally at table 4, were now at table 9, by the kitchen doors. "For balance," Ruth explained. The front tables were now stacked with Whitby cousins, golfing partners, and a mysterious local counselor, who'd been very supportive of the family foundation. Nora found herself seated between Reverend Mark and Ruth's bridge partner, Sylvia. Daniel, busy greeting arriving relatives, didn't notice. Lila muttered, "She's isolating you at your own wedding." "It's fine," Nora said, though her throat tightened. "Tomorrow, I'll be Mrs. Whitby. Then maybe she'll stop testing me." That afternoon, a small rehearsal took place inside St. Helen's Chapel. The vicar droned through the order of service while Ruth fluttered behind him, correcting where ribbons should hang. When Nora tried to speak about including a brief memorial for her father, Ruth interrupted. "Oh no, dear, we mustn't dampen spirits. People prefer weddings joyful." Daniel looked caught, torn between them. Finally, he said softly, "Let's just move on." Ruth's satisfied nod was salt in the wound. By sunset, Nora walked alone along the stone path leading to the farmhouse. From the open barn doors came laughter and the faint clink of glasses. Ruth's post-rehearsal thank you, for vendors and close family. Nora hadn't been told it was happening. Through the window she saw Ruth raising her glass, voice amplified. "We welcome Nora to the family. She's spirited." Polite chuckles followed. "But with guidance she'll fit our Whitby ways." The guests laughed again, Daniel among them. He looked uncomfortable but didn't speak. Nora turned away, heart hammering. Spirited. With guidance. Every word a velvet leash. She walked back to the cottage and sat at the table, flipping open her notebook. She wrote down everything Ruth had changed. The schedule, the seating, even the floral colors Ruth had overridden. And then, next to the list, she wrote a single sentence. I will not be erased at my own wedding. At dawn, Lila found her still awake, hair messy, pin marks on her hand. You okay? Better than okay, Nora said, sliding the notebook shut. I'm making a new plan. What kind of plan? The quiet kind. Ruth wants a perfect show. Let's give her one she'll never forget. Lila grinned. Now that's the Nora I remember. The rehearsal dinner had taught Nora a cruel truth. Silence invited edits. Tomorrow she would speak, but not from Ruth's script. The morning of the wedding began with the smell of lavender polish and panic. The Whitby estate buzzed like a beehive. Florists clipping stems, the photographer angling the manor in perfect light, Ruth commanding the air like a conductor. Nora woke early, restless. She slipped outside with a cup of tea and watched mist curl over the hedgerows. In that soft hour before anyone else stirred, she rehearsed her speech under her breath, steadying the tremor in her voice. She knew Ruth would notice if she wavered. But Ruth wouldn't hear her silence again. By 8, the cottage swarmed with stylists and bridesmaids. Lila leaned close, whispering as her curling iron hissed. You ready? As I'll ever be, Nora said. You sure about your plan? Nora smiled faintly. It's not revenge. It's truth. Truth with good timing, Lila murmured. Best kind. Ruth arrived at 9:30, wearing a pearl gray dress that gleamed like diplomacy. Morning, darling, she trilled, eyes scanning Nora's gown. Oh, that fabric photographs well. I suppose it's modern. Nora resisted the urge to laugh. Thank you. Ruth clasped her hands. Now remember, keep your vows under 2 minutes. Brevity is elegance. I'll be concise, Nora promised, thinking but not silent. As Ruth swept out, Lila whispered. She's practically choreographing your breathing. Nora shrugged. Then she'll hate what happens next. The ceremony unfolded with ruthless perfection. Strings played, candles flickered, and Ruth dabbed delicately at her eyes. Daniel looked handsome, nervous, utterly hers in the way of men raised to please both wife and mother. When the vows ended, Nora saw Ruth exhale like a general after victory. There'd been no misstep, no public embarrassment. Yet, during the photographs, Nora noticed the sound technician adjusting a new microphone at the reception barn. A small detail but crucial. Ruth had insisted on hiring her preferred sound company, but Nora had quietly spoken to the young technician, Owen, the night before. She told him she wanted to record Daniel's speech as a keepsake for her family who couldn't attend. Owen, kind and curious, had nodded and said the system would capture everything said into the primary mic until manually muted. Everything. By the time guests settled into the barn for the reception, Ruth was radiant with control. Candlelight shimmered over the long tables, linen white and orderly. Nora's friends from Leeds sat near the kitchen as reassigned, yet their laughter persisted, a small rebellion of joy. Daniel opened the evening with a modest speech about gratitude and family. When he finished, Ruth rose for her surprise tribute. Lila squeezed Nora's hand. Here it comes. Ladies and gentlemen, Ruth began, voice smooth as cream. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome Nora into our family. She paused for applause. When Daniel told me he'd met someone different, I admit I was uncertain. Nora is, how shall I say, spirited. A ripple of polite laughter. But, as any Whitby will tell you, a spirited horse simply needs the right reins. Nora froze. The words landed like tiny darts, each cloaked in civility. She saw Daniel's face stiffen. Ruth went on, telling a funny story about Nora forgetting to RSVP to a charity dinner, about her learning to adapt to Whitby traditions. Guests chuckled uneasily. Nora's heart pounded in her ears. Then Ruth concluded, let's raise a glass to our newest Whitby, who with a little guidance will make a fine addition. Lila whispered. That woman's got gall. Nora rose slowly, applause still echoing. Ruth blinked, surprised. Thank you, Ruth, Nora said, taking the microphone. That was enlightening. Her voice was calm, the kind of calm that slices. Since we're speaking of guidance, I'd like to share something too. She glanced at Owen near the sound desk. He gave a small nod. The mic was live and the recording running. Marriage to me, Nora continued, isn't about reins or refinement. It's partnership. My father used to say, good manners are empathy spoken aloud. He taught me that no title, no name on a signboard, is worth more than simple respect. A hush spread. Even Ruth's smile faltered. I'm grateful to everyone here who's shown kindness, not control. And to those who tried to silence me, thank you. You reminded me how important it is to speak for myself. Gasps fluttered through the hall. Nora smiled, raised her glass, and sat. Ruth recovered quickly, clapping twice, brittle. How unconventional. But the damage was done. Guests murmured. Daniel squeezed Nora's hand under the table, whispering, that was bold. She looked at him steadily. It was necessary. After the first dance, Ruth cornered her near the dessert table, voice low. You embarrassed me. You did that yourself, Nora replied. But thank you for keeping the microphone on. Ruth's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Just that Owen's recording captured your tribute beautifully. My friends will love it. Ruth blanched. You wouldn't. I wouldn't what? Share what was said in public at my own wedding. Nora smiled sweetly. Relax. I'm not cruel. Then she walked away, leaving Ruth staring uncertain. Outside in the cool night air, Nora leaned against the stone wall, finally breathing freely. Lila joined her, handing a slice of cake. You handled that like royalty. Nora shook her head. No, just someone who's done being edited. They laughed softly, the tension dissolving under the stars. But as they turned back toward the barn, they saw Ruth at the edge of the crowd, whispering to Daniel's uncle, eyes sharp as glass. Whatever peace Nora had earned was temporary. The war she knew had only changed fronts. The morning after the wedding smelled of rain-soaked roses and leftover Prosecco. The Whitby estate slept late, except for Ruth. By 8 o'clock she was already directing cleaners, her voice crisp and bright. Mind the oak tables, please, they're antiques. Nora stirred in the cottage to the faint clang of cutlery being boxed away. She watched Daniel sleep, his hand draped over the pillow, oblivious. Part of her longed to let the night's peace linger, but another part, the side that had written a list of every slight, knew something was still wrong. Because Ruth Whitby didn't lose gracefully. By mid-morning, Nora found her outside the barn, speaking to a man in a navy blazer. He was tall, with a folder tucked under his arm. Nora caught fragments of conversation. Venue partnership, renewal, and control of booking rights. Ruth noticed her and turned sharply. Oh, Nora. You're up. This is Mr. Ellis from Whitby Heritage Trust. We're finalizing the stewardship papers for the barn. The trust owns it? Nora asked. Well, technically, Ruth said smoothly, Daniel and I manage it. It's family land, but we let the trust handle public events. Keeps things tidy. Mr. Ellis smiled politely. Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Whitby. We appreciate your cooperation in the transfer. Transfer? Nora repeated. Ruth's hand fluttered. A mere formality. Paperwork bores you, dear. But the look in Ruth's eyes, tight assessing, told Nora this was no formality. Later, over breakfast, Nora asked Daniel about it. She's renewing the trust deed, he said through a mouthful of toast. It's just maintenance, I think. You think? He sighed. Nora, it's her property. I didn't want to argue right after the wedding. Technically, Nora said, it's family property. And we're family now. Daniel hesitated, then said softly, don't start again. Let's just have a calm week before the honeymoon. She bit back a retort. Fine. But the calm didn't come. By noon, guests had left and cleaners packed away the last chairs. Nora wandered through the barn, now quiet except for the hum of flies near empty wine glasses. She climbed the wooden stairs to the loft, where extra chairs were stored beneath dust sheets. There, among boxes of leftover decorations, she found a folder. The same navy one Mr. Ellis had carried. Its clasp was open. Inside, typed on heavy paper, were words that made her skin prickle. Transfer of venue lease and operating rights, Whitby Barn Events property. Below the heading, current manager, Ruth Whitby. Successor co-signatory, Daniel Whitby. Her name was nowhere. She scanned the paragraphs. The trust would lease the barn's operation for 10 years to the managing family representatives. All profits from weddings, community events, and agricultural fairs would flow through Ruth's Whitby Heritage Consultancy. At the bottom typed neatly a clause. In the event of incapacity or retirement of the co-signatory, the management rights shall revert solely to the primary signatory, Mrs. Ruth Whitby. A small note in the margin, handwritten, read, Daniel to sign post-wedding before departure. Nora felt her stomach drop. It wasn't just a building. The barn generated income. It hosted events nearly every weekend. This lease effectively placed all control and money back into Ruth's hands. She photographed every page with her phone, heart pounding. Then she heard footsteps. Ruth's voice floated up the stairs. Nora, darling? Are you up there? Nora slipped the folder under a cloth. Yes. Just grabbing my bouquet. I left it here. Ruth appeared at the top of the stairs, smiling thinly. You shouldn't wander in that gown. It'll snag. I'll change soon, Nora said. Ruth's eyes flicked toward the cloth-covered boxes. Nothing interesting up here, I'm afraid. Old paperwork. I'm sure, Nora said, meeting her gaze. That evening, Nora and Daniel attended a small farewell dinner with close relatives. Ruth sat at the head of the table, her laughter smooth again. To new beginnings, she toasted. Nora lifted her glass but kept her expression neutral. After dessert, Ruth leaned toward Daniel. Before you go on honeymoon, love, we just need your signature on the trust renewal. Legal timing, you understand. Oh, that, Daniel said absently. Sure. Nora interjected. Why the rush? Ruth's smile didn't falter. Because if we wait, the council's fiscal quarter closes and we'll have to refile. Mr. Ellis, seated nearby, nodded. It's standard. Nora turned to Daniel. You're signing a lease on property you don't fully control. Shouldn't we both review it? Ruth laughed lightly. My dear, it's a simple stewardship. Not every matter requires a committee. Daniel looked caught again. I trust Mum. She's managed this for years. Nora placed her napkin down. Trust is earned, not inherited. The table fell quiet. Ruth's eyes glittered. Careful, Nora. In this family, respect is the currency that buys peace. Nora met her gaze steadily. Then I suppose I'm in debt. That night, Daniel accused her of overreacting. You're turning everything into a battle. Because she keeps trying to erase me, Nora said. First the speech, now property paperwork. He rubbed his temples. I'll review the papers, okay? Just don't start a scene. Promise. He hesitated. Promise. The next morning, Ruth called unexpectedly to say she'd taken the papers to the solicitor already. Just for safekeeping, she said sweetly. Nora thanked her, hung up, and exhaled slowly. Then she texted Lila. Can you meet me at the barn this afternoon? Bring your laptop. Lila replied instantly. What's up? Time to read some bylaws, Nora wrote. When they met later that day, Nora spread her phone photos across Lila's screen. This clause, look. It says management rights revert to Ruth upon Daniel's incapacity or retirement. But the trust charter states 2 signatures minimum for renewal. Lila blinked. Meaning if Daniel signs without your witness, it's invalid? Not invalid, disputable. And I have the time-stamped photos to prove this version was unreviewed. Lila grinned. You're learning to speak Whitby. Or fight her with her own language, Nora said quietly. They hid the folder where Nora found it but replaced the top page with a small handwritten note. Transparency builds trust. Then they left, leaving only dust motes swirling behind. At sunset, Ruth discovered the note. Her eyes hardened and she made a call, voice sharp, low. Ellis, ensure the revised contract is signed tonight. I don't want her meddling again. Nora, in the cottage nearby, watched from the window as Ruth's silhouette crossed the courtyard. She held her phone ready, camera open. The rain began again, steady as resolve. The war for control had found its paper battlefield. Rain fell in silver threads over the cobblestones of Ripon's Market Square, slicking the flagstones outside Ashton and Cooper, the oldest solicitor's office in town. Inside, the air smelled of polish and ink. The morning had begun with Ruth's invitation, a message delivered through Daniel. Mum says we're needed for a quick signing at the solicitor's. Routine. Routine, Nora echoed, fastening her coat. That's what she said about the seating chart. Daniel sighed, adjusting his tie. Please, Nora. Let's not make this a battle. We'll sign, go for lunch, and move on. She nodded silently, but her thoughts were far from surrender. At 9 sharp, the Whitbys entered the office. Ruth immaculate in tweed and pearls, Daniel dutiful and Nora calm, notebook tucked beneath her arm. Mr. Ellis from the trust stood waiting beside a balding solicitor with horn-rimmed glasses, Mr. Cooper himself, whose family name adorned the brass plaque outside. Good morning, everyone, Cooper said cheerfully. We'll just review the stewardship agreement before we sign. Nora watched as Ruth handed over a folder, sleek, clean, the navy one she'd found in the barn. Only now the pages were different. When Cooper read aloud, Nora heard the shift immediately. The new version listed primary signatory, Mrs. Ruth Whitby, and supporting signatory, Daniel Whitby. The reversion clause had changed too. It now specified that upon any change in marital status or delegated absence, control reverted solely to Ruth. Marital status. The wording chilled her. She raised her hand. I'm sorry, Mr. Cooper. Could you clarify what delegated absence means in this context? Cooper peered over his spectacles. It's a standard clause. Typically, it means if one of the managing parties steps aside or is otherwise unavailable, say during travel, the remaining party retains operational authority. Ruth smiled faintly. Exactly. Since Daniel and Nora are soon off on honeymoon, it's practical that I maintain oversight. Nora's pulse ticked. But this version, was it filed with the trust? Ruth's tone sharpened. Of course. Mr. Ellis provided it this morning. Ellis shifted uncomfortably. Technically, this was a draft. Nora opened her notebook. Then perhaps we should wait until the trust board approves it officially. It seems premature to sign something unratified. Cooper hesitated. Mrs. Whitby, the younger one, raises a fair point. The older Mrs. Whitby gave him a glacial look. It's Mrs. Whitby and Mrs. Whitby now, Mr. Cooper. Do try to keep up. A few polite laughs rippled from the clerks nearby. Nora felt her cheeks flush, but not from shame. Daniel looked between them. Mom, maybe we should. Nonsense, Ruth cut in. Daniel, sign here, darling. She slid the pen toward him, manicured nails gleaming. But Daniel didn't move. He glanced at Nora, at the notebook she clutched like a shield. What's wrong? Ruth asked, voice dangerously sweet. Nora spoke evenly. If Daniel signs this, he's agreeing that in our absence, even a honeymoon, you have sole control over the venue, income, and management. That's not stewardship, Ruth. That's ownership. Murmurs filled the room. Ellis looked uneasy again. Technically, Mrs. Whitby, the younger, is right. The trust expects shared accountability. Dual oversight prevents conflicts of interest. Ruth's composure faltered for a fraction of a second. It's a simple convenience. Nora smiled faintly. Then it can wait until we return. No rush. Cooper cleared his throat. That's the most prudent course. Best not to sign under unclear terms. Ruth's jaw tightened. Mr. Cooper, my family has conducted business here for 30 years. And we'd like to continue doing so, Nora interrupted, polite but firm. With transparency. Outside, the rain had stopped. Nora and Daniel walked in silence until they reached the car. He finally said, I didn't realize she changed it again. She's testing how much she can get away with, Nora replied. Every signature, every speech. It's control by paper and politeness. He sighed. I should have backed you up sooner. You did just now, Nora said softly. That's what matters. He squeezed her hand. Let's get away for a bit. Forget all this. But Nora shook her head. Not yet. There's something I need to confirm first. That afternoon, she went alone to the Whitby Heritage Trust office, a narrow building off the square with filing cabinets and the smell of old paper. A young assistant, Amelia, recognized her from the wedding photos in the local paper. Oh, Mrs. Whitby. Congratulations. Thank you, Nora said. I'm hoping to verify the current lease documents for the barn. Mr. Ellis mentioned a renewal. Amelia pulled a binder from the shelf. Let's see, yes, here's the active lease. Signed last quarter by Mrs. Ruth Whitby and Mr. Arthur Whitby. Nora blinked. Arthur. Her late husband, Amelia said. It hasn't been formally updated since his passing. The new documents haven't cleared board approval yet, meaning Ruth's transfer was invalid until signed and reviewed by the trustees. Nora smiled. May I have a certified copy of that page for my records? Of course, Amelia said, stamping the form. Nora slid the paper into her folder, heart steady now. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving Ruth's games. She was learning their rules. That evening, back at the cottage, she found Ruth waiting in the sitting room, cup of tea poised like a prop. I hope you're proud, Ruth said. You made quite a spectacle this morning. I asked reasonable questions. You humiliated me in front of our solicitor. You tried to take ownership of a building you don't fully control. Ruth stood. I am safeguarding our legacy. You wouldn't understand. Your family left you nothing but ideals. Nora met her eyes. Maybe ideals are the only legacy worth keeping. Ruth's lips curved into a cold smile. Enjoy your little victories. You'll find they don't last long. Then she swept out, her heels clicking against the tiles like punctuation marks of war. Later that night, Daniel found Nora in the kitchen, staring at the stamped document. What's that? He asked. Proof that your mother's lease expired years ago. She's been operating the barn on assumption, not authority. He rubbed his jaw. If that gets out. It won't, Nora said. Not yet. But next time she tries to corner us, she won't be the only one holding paper. Daniel smiled faintly. Remind me never to underestimate you again. Please do, Nora said. It keeps me sharp. The next day, the Whitbys hosted a post-wedding brunch for close community friends. Ruth arrived early, greeting guests with exaggerated warmth. Nora stayed composed, even when Ruth clinked her glass mid-meal and announced, I have a small announcement to share about the future of Whitby Barn. Nora's hand tightened around her napkin. Ruth continued, pending council approval, we'll soon rebrand the venue under my consultancy, ensuring professional oversight. Polite applause followed. Then Nora rose slowly. That's interesting, Ruth, because the trust's current records still list your late husband as co-signatory. Perhaps the board will appreciate the update. The applause faltered. Ruth froze, smile brittle. Nora smiled softly. Transparency, after all, builds trust. Lila across the table raised her glass. To transparency, she said brightly. Several guests followed. Ruth lowered her eyes, fury flickering behind her composure. The balance had shifted. Quietly, firmly, the daughter-in-law had stepped into the light. The brunch confrontation spread through Ripon faster than fresh scones at a fete. By evening, half the parish had heard whispers that Ruth Whitby's papers weren't in order. Ruth maintained her composure, but the tremor behind her smile betrayed her. Nora spent the following days walking a careful line. Daniel, loyal yet conflicted, oscillated between pride in her resolve and guilt over the rift widening between his wife and mother. She'll calm down, he said one night as they folded honeymoon clothes into suitcases. No, Nora murmured, smoothing a linen dress. She'll regroup. He hesitated. Why does it matter so much to you, Nora? The barn, the trust. None of it really affects us. She looked at him then, steady and soft. Because it's not just about property. It's about control. And who gets to speak in this family without permission? Daniel sighed. You sound like a lawyer. Someone in this family should. 2 mornings later, as Nora dropped off thank you cards at the church, she noticed Reverend Mark sorting through a stack of old parish ledgers in the vestry. Morning, Reverend, she said, forcing brightness. Mrs. Whitby, he greeted with a smile. Or may I still say Nora? Hard to keep track these days. Please do. He gestured at the stack. Trying to organize the parish records. Found a few items that belong more to the town archives than to the church. Your family features quite a bit, actually. My family? He chuckled. Well, your husband's. The Whitbys have donated land, hosted fates, even underwrote a new bell tower once upon a time. Nora smiled faintly, then noticed a small, sealed envelope tucked among the ledgers. The ink faded to brown. What's that? Oh, this? Came with the old stewardship documents. Dated about 10 years ago. Addressed to the Whitby Heritage Trust, though it was never posted. May I? Of course, he said, handing it over. You'd know better what to do with it. The letter's wax seal crumbled under her thumb. Inside, written in a graceful, unfamiliar hand, "To whom it may concern. If this letter reaches you, it means the management of the Whitby estate is in transition. I wish to record for the sake of clarity that the barn property, while long associated with our family, was never intended to serve private interests. It was bequeathed to the trust for community use free of charge. Any attempt to convert it into a personal enterprise contradicts both my intention and the terms of the 1989 deed, filed under Parish Lot 14B. Yours faithfully, Arthur Whitby." Nora read it twice, heart racing. Ruth's late husband had left explicit instructions preventing the very scheme she was attempting. At the bottom of the page was a faint note in blue ink, likely written by the Reverend at the time. "Copy stored with deed file, St. Helens Parish." Nora thanked the Reverend and hurried to the small records room beneath the nave. The air was cool, stone walls lined with wooden drawers labeled by lot numbers. She found 14B easily, thin, unassuming. Inside was a single folded sheet of parchment with a typed deed, sealed and notarized. The key passage matched Arthur's letter. "Whitby Barn, situated on Parish Lot 14B, is to remain under community stewardship. Revenue generated from events shall be allocated toward parish maintenance and charitable works." So Ruth's consultancy profits weren't just unethical. They were in direct violation of the deed. Nora snapped photos, each click echoing softly against the walls. That evening, she met Lila at the cafe by Market Square. Lila arrived, hair windblown, laptop slung over her shoulder. "You look like someone who just found buried treasure," Lila said, sliding into the booth. "Buried truth," Nora corrected, placing the copies on the table. "Ruth's been profiting off parish land meant for the community. Her husband left it explicitly to the trust." Lila skimmed the letter, whistling low. "That's huge. Does Daniel know?" "Not yet. I need to handle this carefully. If I confront her too soon, she'll twist it." Lila smirked. "And if you wait too long? Then she'll bury it again." As predicted, Ruth arrived at their cottage the next morning, unannounced but smiling. "Good news," she declared, stepping inside as if she owned the place. "The trust has accepted my restructured lease. They'll make it official next month." "Interesting," Nora said evenly. "Did they now?" "Yes. Mr. Ellis confirmed it yesterday." Daniel frowned. "He didn't mention that when I spoke to him." "Oh, perhaps he didn't wish to bother you, dear." Nora folded her arms. "Ruth, could you remind me, under which parish lot the barn sits?" Ruth blinked. "Lot? What does that matter? It's 14B, isn't it?" "Possibly." "Why?" "Because I reviewed the parish deed yesterday. It states the barn belongs to the community trust. Not you. Not your consultancy." Ruth's color drained. "You're mistaken. I have photographs." Daniel's gaze darted between them. "Mom, is that true?" Ruth drew herself up. "Your father's intentions were clear. He wanted the family to oversee it." "No," Nora said quietly. "He wanted the family to serve it." The silence stretched, heavy and sharp. Ruth's lips thinned. "If you bring this up publicly, you'll humiliate the family. Then perhaps you shouldn't have taken community funds for personal use." "You wouldn't dare." Nora met her gaze. "Try me." That night, Daniel sat on the edge of their bed, face pale. "I can't believe she's been skimming from parish funds." "She'll justify it as management fees," Nora said. "But the letter proves otherwise." He buried his face in his hands. "What happens if this gets out? The trust, the church, they'll be furious. Then maybe they'll finally see the truth." He looked up at her. "Promise me you won't go to them without talking to me first." "I promise," she said softly, but her mind was already moving. 3 days later, an invitation arrived. Whitby Heritage Trust Quarterly Review. Public attendance welcome. The meeting would be held in the council hall that Friday evening. Ruth, as a long-standing patron, would be there. So would Mr. Ellis and likely the Reverend. Nora stared at the embossed card for a long time, then folded it neatly. "Lila," she said when her friend answered the phone. "Can you print something for me on letterhead? I'll need it notarized." "Something like what?" "A statement from Arthur Whitby." There was a pause. "You're going to drop this at the meeting?" "No," Nora said. I'm going to let the truth read itself aloud. When Friday came, Ruth stood in front of the town council chamber, radiant in navy silk, shaking hands as though born to charm. Nora dear, do behave tonight, won't you? Nora smiled pleasantly. Always. In her bag, the original parish copy rested in a plastic sleeve, the faded signature of Arthur Whitby glowing faintly beneath the lamplight. The meeting began with routine reports, funding allocations, maintenance costs, event bookings. Ruth presented charts and numbers with poise. Under my stewardship, event revenue has nearly doubled. Mr. Ellis nodded. Impressive figures, Mrs. Whitby. We'll now open the floor to any members with new information. Nora rose slowly. I have a document to submit regarding the original deed of the Whitby barn. All heads turned. Ruth's smile froze. Mrs. Whitby, Ellis said cautiously, this isn't the venue for. It concerns the trust's legal rights. And the community's. Ruth hissed. Sit down, Nora. But Nora remained standing calm. I believe Arthur Whitby's own letter clarifies his intentions. She placed the copy on the table. He explicitly stated the barn was to remain under community stewardship, not private enterprise. Parish records confirm this under Lot 14b. Gasps rippled through the room. Ruth reached for the paper, but Ellis intercepted her hand. If this is authentic, it supersedes all later drafts. Nora said softly, it's authentic. The Reverend can attest to its origin. Reverend Mark rose from the back. Indeed. I verified the seal myself this week. Ruth's face drained of color. This is a misunderstanding. Is it? Ellis asked quietly. Because it appears your consultancy has been collecting funds owed to the parish. The room erupted in murmurs. Nora sat down, her heart steady as Ruth's empire of manners began to crumble. After the meeting, Ruth stormed past her without a word. Daniel lingered, eyes wide, torn between disbelief and relief. She'll never forgive you, he whispered. Nora met his gaze. Forgiveness isn't the point. Accountability is. Outside, church bells began to ring for evening prayer. Each chime echoed like punctuation on a truth finally spoken aloud. The aftermath of the trust meeting rolled through the town like a slow storm. For 3 days, the Whitby name was everywhere. From the parish bulletin board to whispers at the grocer's. Misuse of community property, some said. A misunderstanding, others murmured. But in every version of the story, Ruth Whitby's perfection cracked. Daniel had taken time off work, trying to broker peace. Nora let him. She knew that peace offered by guilt was just another form of silence, and she'd had enough of both. By the week's end, the Ripon Council had called a formal review. The Whitby Heritage Trust charter required public validation of the management structure, meaning Ruth's reign would stand or end by vote. Ruth predictably launched a charm campaign. Letters, luncheons, and donations reappeared overnight. She even offered to sponsor a new playground in the village. But money couldn't mend the scent of deceit. The morning of the vote, Nora received a call from Reverend Mark. His voice was calm, almost conspiratorial. Mrs. Whitby, pardon Nora, could we meet for a moment before the council convenes? They met in the vestry, morning light spilling through the stained glass in fractured blues and reds. He held a worn leather folder. After your revelation, I checked deeper into the parish correspondence. Arthur Whitby wrote another letter shortly before he died, one the trust never saw. He left it with me under confidence. I think you should read it. Nora opened the folder carefully. Inside lay a single page in Arthur's distinctive hand. To my dear son and whoever he marries, you may inherit a name, but you must earn the right to carry its meaning. The barn, the trust, the house, these are not burdens or thrones. They are promises to our neighbors. If my wife or any successor forgets this, may the trust remind them. The family's honor is not what people say about us. It's how we treat those who cannot speak back. A.W. Beneath the letter was a notary's statement, witnessed by Mark himself, reaffirming that the parish had joint stewardship of the Whitby barn in perpetuity. Nora looked up, breath-catching. Why didn't you show this earlier? Mark's eyes were gentle. Because Arthur asked that it be revealed only when the trust faced compromise. I'd say the moments arrived. At noon, the council hall filled to bursting. Residents sat shoulder to shoulder. their breath misting faintly in the cold air. At the front, a row of counselors presided behind polished oak. Mr. Ellis stood to one side, Ruth to the other. Nora and Daniel sat in the center row, a small island of tension. The chairwoman, Counselor Pratt, called the session to order. We're here to review the management structure of the Whitby Heritage Trust following concerns raised last week. Each side will have the chance to speak before we vote. Ruth rose first, as poised as ever. I've dedicated 20 years to this community. Yes, there were administrative oversights, but no ill intent. The funds went toward maintaining the barn, a venue that brings joy and commerce to Ripon. A few polite nods answered her. Then Nora stood. The issue isn't joy or commerce. It's ownership. The barn belongs to this parish, not any one family. Ruth Whitby's consultancy diverted funds intended for the church and local initiatives. Her late husband's own letters confirm it. Ruth's head snapped toward her. You're twisting sentiment into law. Nora held up a copy of Arthur's final letter. No, I'm quoting it. She handed it to the clerk. The room hushed as the words were read aloud. When the clerk reached the line, "The family's honor is how we treat those who cannot speak back," a murmur rippled through the hall. Ruth's color drained, though her smile held, trembling at the corners. A forgery, she said quietly. Reverend Mark rose from the audience. It isn't. I witnessed the signature myself. Ellis nodded. And I verified the seal. This document is authentic. Counselor Pratt leaned forward. Mrs. Ruth Whitby, the trust's bylaws require co-signatories to act in the community's interest. Given this evidence, we must consider suspension of your management privileges pending review. Ruth's voice wavered for the first time. You would dismiss decades of service based on one letter and the word of a resentful daughter-in-law? Nora answered, calm but cutting. You dismiss decades of integrity based on what you could get away with. Gasps echoed. Pratt struck her gavel softly. That's enough. We'll recess for deliberation. Outside in the courtyard, Daniel approached Nora. You blindsided her, he said quietly. She blindsided herself, Nora replied. I just opened the curtain. She's still my mother. I know. He hesitated. Do you think she'll ever forgive you? No, Nora said softly. But someday maybe she'll understand me. When the council reconvened, the chairwoman read the decision aloud. Effective immediately, Mrs. Ruth Whitby's management authority within the Whitby Heritage Trust is suspended. The trust shall appoint a provisional committee to oversee operations, including community representatives and members of the Whitby family, pending audit. Ruth's knuckles whitened on the table. And who, may I ask, will lead this so-called committee? Counselor Pratt adjusted her glasses. Given her initiative and proven commitment to transparency, the council invites Mrs. Nora Whitby to serve as interim liaison until the audit concludes. The hall erupted in applause. Ruth rose, trembling with restrained fury. This is an ambush. It's accountability, Pratt said evenly. Nora stood slowly. Thank you, Counselor. I'll accept, with the understanding that every record, every ledger, will be reviewed openly. Ellis extended his hand. Then let's begin anew. Afterward, in the fading winter light, Nora lingered outside the hall as the crowd dispersed. Ruth emerged moments later, her expression a careful mask. You've humiliated me in my own town, Ruth said softly. No, Nora answered. You did that when you forgot whose town it was. Ruth's eyes glistened, anger or tears Nora couldn't tell. You've won for now. But every family has skeletons. Are you sure you can bear to rattle ours? Nora held her gaze. I don't rattle skeletons, Ruth. I build homes for the living. Ruth turned away without reply. That evening, Daniel found Nora in the barn, sitting alone amid the quiet wooden beams. A single bulb glowed overhead. Do you ever get tired of fighting? He asked gently. Every day, she said. But it's better than pretending not to see the battle. He sat beside her. You know, she'll find another way. She always does. Then I'll find the truth faster, Nora said simply. He smiled faintly. You're becoming a Whitby in your own right. Maybe I'm becoming what a Whitby was meant to be. As they left the barn, Nora noticed something taped to the door. An old parish flyer from years ago. At the bottom in faded ink was a motto Arthur had once written for the family's charity drives. Service before pride, truth before name. She touched it lightly, a promise renewed. But in the distance Ruth watched from the window of her car, her silhouette rigid. Her empire might be crumbling, but the war was not yet over. And Ruth Whitby never went quietly. 6 weeks later, the barn's oak door stood open again. This time not for a wedding, but for an audit. The long tables where toasts once rang now bore ring binders, laptops, and the slow hiss of printers. Ruth Whitby's consultancy had been suspended, her once flawless reputation now a question mark whispered through every market stall and parish pew. The Whitby Heritage Trust's external auditors arrived from Harrogate, brisk and unsmiling. They set up camp in the barn's loft, converting it into a temporary command post. Every invoice, bank transfer, and event record was under review. Nora, now acting as interim liaison, spent her days sorting files, logging receipts, and answering polite but pointed questions. It was exhausting work, but each discovery was a thread pulling Ruth's tapestry of control apart. Daniel drifted between them, torn like a bridge cracking under two rivers. He loved his mother, but the evidence was undeniable. By mid-March, the auditors requested a formal hearing to close the process. A public one, as the trust's bylaws required. The notice was pinned on the parish board. Audit review and findings, open session, Council Hall, Friday 10 a.m. The same venue where Ruth's downfall had begun. That week Ruth reemerged. She'd been silent since the council vote, retreating to her house outside Ripon. When she arrived at the barn the day before the hearing, even the air changed sharp perfume, heels striking against the flagstones like a returning monarch. "Good afternoon, Nora," she said smoothly. "I assume my family's affairs are being handled with diligence?" Nora didn't look up from the ledger. "Every number is accounted for." Ruth's smile tightened. "And yet, I see you've grown comfortable in my role." "It's not your role anymore. It belongs to the community." Ruth leaned close. "The community doesn't pay your mortgage, dear. Daniel's career depends on this family's name. Do you really want to be the one who ruins it?" Nora closed the ledger and met her eyes. "I'm not ruining the name. I'm cleaning it." The day of the hearing dawned bright and cold. The council hall filled early, councillors, trust members, parishioners, even a few reporters from the Yorkshire Post. The air buzzed with anticipation, part civic duty, part theatre. Ruth arrived late, deliberately. Her navy coat gleamed, her pearls caught the light. She looked like respectability reborn. Daniel sat beside her, pale and silent. Nora, seated opposite, wore a simple gray dress and no jewelry, just her brass key pendant, glinting faintly beneath her collar. Councillor Pratt opened the proceedings. "We're here to review the findings of the independent audit regarding the Whitby Heritage Trust's finances and governance. Mrs. Nora Whitby has cooperated fully in this review. Mrs. Ruth Whitby has submitted a written statement of defense. We'll hear from both." The lead auditor, a tall woman named Mrs. Kersey, stood with a clipboard. "Our team reviewed 5 years of accounts. We found repeated transfers from the trust's public fund into a private consultancy account held by Mrs. Ruth Whitby, labeled Operational Oversight." Murmurs spread. "Each payment averaged £2,000 monthly," Kersey continued. "These were not authorized by the trust board, nor declared to the council as required." Pratt nodded grimly. "And where were these funds directed?" "Primarily to Whitby Heritage Consultancy. Additionally, a portion financed private renovations at the Whitby residence, including the installation of a conservatory and landscaping." A gasp rippled through the audience. Ruth's composure fractured for a heartbeat before she recovered. "Those were loans," she said sharply. The trust agreed verbally. "My late husband always allowed discretionary spending." Nora rose. "But the deed forbids private use of community funds. And the only person who could authorize exceptions was Arthur Whitby. He never did." Ruth's voice turned brittle. "You presume to know his mind?" "No," Nora said softly. "I read his letters." Kersey cleared her throat. "We also discovered an email exchange between Mrs. Ruth Whitby and a council contractor regarding event fees. The contractor offered a discount for parish events, which Mrs. Whitby declined, instructing them to bill her consultancy at full rate and submit the same invoice to the trust. This effectively doubled her profits. The room stirred again. Pratt's gavel tapped once. "Please remain orderly." Ruth's face paled. That was a clerical miscommunication. Ellis handled most of the. Ellis stood abruptly from the back row. "With respect, Mrs. Whitby, I never saw those instructions. And the emails came from your personal account." Even Daniel flinched. Kersey continued, unflinching. "In total, approximately £83,000 were diverted from community use." The silence was absolute. Counselor Pratt folded her hands. "Mrs. Whitby, do you have anything to say before the council deliberates?" Ruth stood slowly. For once her voice trembled. "Everything I did to preserve this family's standing. My husband built that barn's reputation, and I refused to let it rot under neglect. You think community committees understand legacy? Without my guidance, it would have fallen apart." Her eyes flashed toward Nora. "And you've twisted loyalty into treason." Nora rose steady as stone. "Loyalty isn't blind obedience, Ruth. It's holding the people you love accountable when they forget what love means." The hall buzzed again, softer now. An exhale of truth too long held. After a recess, the council returned with its verdict. Pratt's tone was solemn. "By unanimous vote, the council finds that Mrs. Ruth Whitby misappropriated community funds and breached the stewardship terms of the trust. She is hereby removed from all positions within the Whitby Heritage Trust. The funds identified in the audit will be repaid through liquidation of her consultancy assets. Furthermore, in light of Mrs. Nora Whitby's integrity and cooperation, the council requests she serve as permanent trustee liaison to ensure transparency going forward." Applause erupted, not loud or mocking but steady like rain returning after drought. Ruth sank back into her chair, expression hollow. Daniel took her hand gently, but she pulled away. "Don't pity me," she whispered. "You chose her side." He looked down. "I chose the truth." After the session, Ruth left without a word. The reporters swarmed briefly, but Nora declined interviews. Instead, she returned to the barn as dusk settled, its rafters golden in the fading light. She walked the length of the hall, fingertips brushing the wood that had witnessed every battle. Reverend Mark appeared quietly at the door. "It's done then." "Yes," Nora said. "Finally." He smiled faintly. Arthur would have been proud. He always hoped someone would keep the trust honest. He just never imagined it would take another Whitby to do it. Nora exhaled, the weight finally lifting. "I didn't do it to win. I just wanted peace." "Peace comes at the cost of truth," Mark said. "And you've paid in full." Later, in the quiet of the cottage, Daniel poured 2 glasses of wine. "You realize," he said softly, "you've rewritten what being a Whitby means." Nora smiled. "I didn't rewrite it. I just turned the page." He raised his glass. "To new pages." They drank, the brass key pendant resting against her collarbone. A small symbol of what she'd unlocked. Dignity without vengeance. Outside, the church bells tolled once more. Somewhere across town, Ruth sat alone in her conservatory, stripped of titles, surrounded by the beauty she'd bought with borrowed virtue. The wind rattled the glass panes gently, like the sigh of a legacy coming undone. The first crocuses had begun to push through the stone walls of Ripon when the Whitby barn reopened, not for business but for service. Under the new trust committee, it had been transformed back into what Arthur Whitby's old letters had intended. A space for community gatherings, charity suppers, and the annual parish art show. Gone were the gilt-framed photos of Ruth smiling beside counselors. In their place hung children's drawings of the barn, rendered in bright crayons and uneven hearts. Nora stood near the entrance, clipboard in hand, as volunteers arranged tables laden with tea urns and jam jars. Her brass key pendant glinted in the afternoon light. It had been 6 months since the audit hearing. The repayments from Ruth's consultancy had restored the parish accounts, and the trust's new bylaws, drafted by Nora and Reverend Mark, ensured no one could ever misuse its funds again. Today's event, fittingly, was the Whitby Community Day, organized in memory of Arthur Whitby. The invitation had gone out to everyone, including Ruth. Whether she'd come was another matter. Daniel joined Nora by the doorway, sleeves rolled up, carrying a crate of hymn books. "Crowd's looking good," he said, nodding toward the bustling courtyard. Even the counselors turned up early. She used to say punctuality was the measure of class, Nora said, half smiling. He chuckled. Then she'd hate how early they are. She squeezed his hand. Thank you for standing with me. He met her eyes. It took me too long, but I'm here now. Nora hesitated. Do you think she'll come? I don't know, he said quietly. But if she does, I hope she sees what you've done here. By midday, sunlight flooded the barn, casting soft gold across the oak beams. Reverend Mark opened the event with a short speech, his voice echoing warmly. Arthur Whitby believed service and pride need not be enemies, so long as one serves first. Today we honor that idea, and the people who've protected it. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Mark continued. We'd like to thank Mrs. Nora Whitby for restoring not only the trust's integrity but its heart. The applause swelled this time, full and sincere. Nora flushed, nodding once before retreating to help the volunteers. Then she noticed a figure standing in the doorway, half in light, half in shadow. Ruth. For a long moment they simply looked at each other. Ruth wore no pearls this time, no polished armor. Just a plain navy coat and a silk scarf knotted neatly at her throat. Her face looked older, softer somehow. Nora crossed the floor quietly. I wasn't sure you'd come. Ruth's voice, though steady, carried a trace of humility. I almost didn't. But Daniel sent me the program. I wanted to see what you'd done with my old barn. It was never just yours, Nora said gently. That's the point. Ruth's eyes roamed the space. The decorations, the laughter, the volunteers sweeping past with trays of biscuits. It's different. Livelier. It's honest, Nora said. They stood in silence for a moment before Ruth sighed. I didn't mean to become what I did. I thought control was the same as care. When Arthur died, I told myself I was preserving his legacy. I suppose I was really just trying not to lose mine. Nora nodded. It's hard to let go of something that used to define you. Ruth's eyes glistened. Do they hate me? Some do, Nora admitted. But most just want to move forward. So do I. Ruth managed a weak smile. You sound like Arthur. Always finding grace where I saw only order. Then maybe we're both still learning from him. Ruth hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. I found this cleaning out my desk. It's your wedding toast, the one I removed. You left the note cards in the drawer. I thought you might want them. Nora took them carefully, the edges yellowed, ink still smudged. Thank you. For what it's worth, Ruth said quietly. You were right that day. It was your moment. I shouldn't have stolen it. Nora smiled faintly. You gave it back eventually. Ruth blinked, confused. The microphone, remember? Nora said softly. You left it on. Ruth's lips twitched, the ghost of a laugh, half shame, half amusement. So I did. They stood together watching the children perform a small choir piece. When the last notes faded, Reverend Mark announced, Mrs. Whitby, Nora, would you like to say a few words? Nora hesitated, then glanced at Ruth, who gave the slightest nod. She stepped forward, note cards in hand. Thank you. When I first came here, I thought the Whitby barn was just a building. A place for parties and photographs. But I've learned that walls remember. They remember laughter, vows, even arguments. What matters is what we choose to echo. She paused, looking out at the faces before her. Daniel, Lila, Ruth in the doorway, and 100 neighbors who'd witnessed the whole messy arc of their story. My father used to say good manners are empathy spoken aloud, she continued. Maybe community is the same thing, kindness made visible. She smiled, lifted her glass of lemonade. To truth, to service, and to every mistake that taught us better. The crowd cheered. And Ruth quietly joined them. That evening, when the guests were gone and the fairy lights dimmed, Nora walked the barn one last time before locking up. Ruth lingered at the doorway, arms folded. I was wrong about you, Ruth said softly. You didn't destroy the Whitby name. You redeemed it. Nora met her eyes. Then maybe it's time you helped me keep it that way. Ruth smiled faintly. As a volunteer, perhaps. Supervision doesn't suit me anymore. I think that would be perfect, Nora said. Weeks later, the local paper ran a small headline above a photo of the barn filled with children painting banners. Whitby barn restored to the people. Family legacy finds new voice. No mention of scandal, no bitterness, just renewal. And in the corner of that photograph, just barely visible, two women stood side by side. One holding a clipboard, the other handing out paintbrushes. In the quiet after everyone left, Nora hung one final plaque above the barn's door, engraved with Arthur's words and her own addition. Whitby Barn. Service before pride. Truth before name. And when truth speaks, listen. She stepped back satisfied. As she turned the brass key in the lock, Ruth's car headlights glowed briefly across the courtyard. Ruth waved once, hesitant but genuine. Nora waved back. For the first time, there was no war left between them. Just the steady peace of two women who had finally learned that legacy, like love, only survives when shared.